This joke may not land, but Higgins Boat sure did. Hello you fine folks, today we're talking about the landing craft of D-Day, codenamed Operation Neptune. And this is an important clarification. Operation Overlord refers to the overall campaign for the Battle of Normandy, but the Normandy landing itself was Operation Neptune. Neptune, god of the sea? In the first 2 months of the invasion, the Allies landed 2 million troops on the French coast. And on D-Day alone, 130,000 men hit the beaches of Normandy. But how did all these men get ashore? Nani? Most of you know the classic Higgins Boat, the landing craft seen in Saving Private Ryan, but there are actually several different types of landing craft used in Operation Neptune. And they're a bit confusing with all their different designations and purposes, so I'm going to break down for you in this video all the main players. Note that this is not a fully comprehensive list because the term landing craft actually referred to 46 different vessels at the time.
Shrimp kebabs, shrimp creole, shrimp gumbo, deep fried, stir fried, lemon shrimp, coconut shrimp, pepper shrimp.
And I don't have time to tell you about boring things like the LBK, the landing barge kitchen, but this is still a pretty precise list, so let's get to it. We're going to work from small to large, and the smallest of all the D-Day landing craft was the DUKW, known as the Duck. The Duck was a nifty amphibious vehicle capable of a speed of 6 knots in water and 50 miles per hour on land. Unlike the rest of the craft in this video, DUKW doesn't actually stand for anything, but each letter comes from the General Motors designation system. D refers to a 1942 design, U comes from utility, K indicates all-wheel drive, and W refers to dual rear axles. The Duck was a modification of the workhorse of the US military, the deuce-and-a-half truck. It was capable of carrying 24 troops or 5,000 pounds of cargo. It was unarmored, but 1 in 4 were fitted with the 50 cal Browning machine gun. The Duck was also the first vehicle that allowed its driver to vary the tire pressure without leaving the vehicle, which made it extremely useful for navigating different terrain types like a sandy beach. 4 Ducks were even equipped with ladders to help the 2nd Ranger Battalion take Pointe du Hoc, although they became stuck on the beach and were used instead as elevated gun positions to suppress the Germans atop the cliff. Next up is the famous LCVP, commonly known as the Higgins Boat, so named for its designer, Andrew Higgins. LCVP stands for Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, meaning it could carry small troops as... meaning it could carry small vehicles as well as troops. Over 23,000 Higgins boats were produced during the war, and 1,500 were used on D-Day. They could carry 36 troops, or either a 3-ton vehicle or 8,000 pounds of cargo. They were 36 feet long and had extremely shallow drafts of 2 to 3 feet, meaning they could get their troops almost all the way to shore before dropping the forward ramp. Like the Duck boats, LCVPs were unarmored, but they were armed with 2 30 caliber machine guns at the rear. Higgins boats would motor their way to shore at a speed of 12 knots, disembark their troops, then return to their parent ships to load up with more men for the next trip. The British version of the Higgins boat was the LCA, or Landing Craft Assault. The LCA had the same capacity of 36 troops, but was slightly larger than the Higgins boat, measuring in at 41 feet long. It varied from the Higgins in that it was fitted with benches that allowed its troops to sit, while the occupants of an LCVP had to stand. However, this also meant that it couldn't accommodate vehicles, and thus was a dedicated troop and cargo transport. LCAs featured light armor to protect its troops, but this also meant they traveled slower at a speed of only 6 knots. Their armament was comparable to LCVPs, but later models featured 2-inch mortars. The big brother of the Higgins boat was the LCM, or Landing Craft Mechanized. LCMs were quite a bit larger than LCVPs, measuring 14 feet wide and 50 feet long. LCMs were produced in several different variations, but the model used on D-Day was the LCM-3, and a few hundred of these were used for the Normandy landings. LCMs were designed for getting armor to the shore, and they could carry 1 30-ton tank, like the M4 Sherman, or 60 troops. The LCM had twin diesel engines and was large and powerful enough to cross the English Channel by itself, whereas the other smaller craft had to piggyback on larger vessels. Making a jump in size from all the previous small craft, we have the LCT, or Landing Craft Tank. LCTs were produced in many different versions throughout the war, but the ones used on D-Day were almost 120 feet long and could carry 4 to 5 tanks or heavy trucks. Over 900 of them were used on D-Day. Unlike the smaller landing craft that only had 1 to 4 crew members, LCTs required a complement of 13 sailors. Despite their size and the capacity to transport 136 tons of cargo, these vessels had a draft of only 2 to 4 feet, allowing them to reach the shore and let their heavy vehicles wade up to the beach from the large bow ramp. In addition to vehicles, LCTs could simultaneously carry dozens of troops, and they featured crewed bunks and a cargo of food for longer treks. Having the space for greater armament, each LCT could sport 2 20mm anti-aircraft guns. However, some larger LCTs threw out the whole landing craft thing entirely and were produced as LCTRs, where where the deck was filled with racks of rockets for fire support. A bit larger than the LCT was the LCI-L, or Landing Craft Infantry Large. LCIs differ from most landing craft in that they don't feature a central bow ramp, but were designed solely for disembarking infantry via 2 smaller side ramps. Commonly referred to as LCs, LCIs were 158 feet long, had a complement of 24 sailors, and could accommodate 180 troops, though later models increased this to 210. LCIs were better equipped for dealing with enemy aircraft and were fitted with 4 20mm anti-aircraft cannons. Despite this armament, LCIs didn't have an armored hull, and they were intended to land in later waves when the beaches were more secure. On Omaha Beach, however, the landing site was not particularly secure even after the first few waves, and LCIs took a severe beating from mines and artillery fire as they approached the beach. There are actually a few accounts from Omaha Beach of multiple LCIs hitting a mine, getting lifted up, and then within a few seconds also getting hit by artillery fire and just getting ripped to shreds and bursting into flame. 250 of them were used on D-Day, and 9 of these large vessels were lost during the initial landings. The largest of the D-Day landing craft was the LST Mark II, standing for Landing Ship Tank. Notice that this is the only one designated a landing ship instead of a landing craft. That's because LSTs were massive compared even to LCTs and LCIs, displacing almost 4,000 tons when fully loaded and measuring 328 feet long. These vessels were designed to deliver substantial armored forces to the beach and could carry 20 Shermans plus 40 light vehicles lashed to its upper deck, while also housing 350 troops. An LST required a crew of over 100 sailors, and it boasted a variety of machine guns and anti-aircraft cannons for defense. LSTs were specialized for carrying tanks and featured a ventilation system in the tank compartment for removing exhaust when all the tanks were fired up. Because, you know, carbon monoxide and all that fun stuff tends to kill people. These vessels had massive bow doors in the front that opened up to allow a heavy ramp to be deployed for disembarkment. Since they took longer to unload due to their size, LSTs were ideally landed at the tail end of a high tide. This ensured that all vehicles could leave without getting swamped as the tide rose, and the LST could cast off again before getting beached. However, in some cases, such as at Omaha Beach, the valuable LSTs were ordered not to directly land at the beaches since they would be in range of enemy artillery. This is where a bonus craft on our list comes in, the Rhino Ferry. Rhino ferries were basically 175-foot rafts powered by 2 outboard motors and consisted of no other working parts. They were made of 180 pontoons, and they served to bridge the gap between larger vessels and the shore. Many LSTs towed Rhino ferries behind them during the channel crossing, and these ferries then detached and maneuvered in front of the LSTs to allow them to unload their cargo. That's actually what's going on in this picture over here. We got the LST, a Rhino ferry, and to me it really looks like that Sherman is about to just drive over the side. Manned not by sailors, but instead by Seabees, men from the construction battalion, these ferries then finished the journey to the shore to disembark vehicles and troops. Unfortunately for the men aboard, these ferries sat extremely low in the water when fully loaded and would frequently be washed over by the cold Atlantic waters, leaving its occupants drenched up to the knees. And that is the short overview of all the landing craft used on D-Day. If all those L's and C's and T's got you a little bit confused, don't worry, it took me quite a while of memorizing all the different designations and purposes of these craft, and it helps to kind of picture them, whereas you have your small group of the little Higgins boats and the LCMs, then you kind of jump up to the LCTs and the LCIs, and then your third final group is just the LST. I personally think the LSTs are the coolest of the bunch here, but let me know in the comments which one you found the most interesting. If this video is worth your time, don't forget to like and do the subscribe so you stay tuned in for future vids. I'll see you guys in the next video. Ruibas out.